Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and for choosing this side event out of many others. This is a very busy week, so we're very grateful to have you all here. And this is both a side event to the Commission on the Status of Women and part of our panel series on women, peace and security that we have launched together with the Liechtenstein Institute of Princeton University a few months back. And we are very excited to have here today both my minister, who is of course heading the project, and a very special guest, Hilde Johnson, the SRSG for South Sudan, whom you everybody know, but I'll turn over immediately to my minister to give some welcoming and opening remarks.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you on our side event, Women's Empowerment in South Sudan, a look at gender-responsive peacekeeping in practice. Today's side event is part of a series of panels Liechtenstein is organizing in a close partnership with the Liechtenstein Institute on Self-Determination at Princeton University and Peace Women. Our goal is to raise awareness about the Women, Peace and Security agenda and to strengthen its implementation. The series so far has been very diverse, in keeping with the wide range of topics covered in the WPS agenda, and found strong interest. I am thankful for that, and I hope for your continued commitment in this, I think, very important initiative. For me, it's a great pleasure to have today with us Hilde Johnson, the SRSG for South Sudan. Hilde is not only an outstanding advocate and expert on both gender issues and the Sudan, she is also, very importantly, one of the few women who are serving in leading UN functions in the field, in particular in the area of mediation. You are a shining example why it is so important to have women take on these responsibilities, and I certainly hope that your work will have a catalytic effect on the overall, still very disappointing record of the UN in this area. As a foreign minister, as a minister of justice, and as a woman, I personally feel very strongly about this issue, especially about protecting women and girls from all forms of violence. I strongly feel that we must do our utmost to support those who are at the forefront of this very important fight. I am just about to enter my second term as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I look very much forward to continuing my personal commitment in this cause, both back home in Liechtenstein, but as well in the international forums. Now I very much look forward to Hilde's comments, and I hope that we will have a very interactive discussion afterwards. Hilde.
Thank you very much. Actually, first we will, no problem, we will have an opportunity to look at some footage from the NGO Witness, headed by Bukemi Baruzi. I think you all know Witness is an NGO that empowers human rights defenders to use video to fight injustice and to transform personal stories into powerful tools to put pressure on those in power. Kenny, over to you, and we look forward to seeing a part of your documentation.
Okay, all right, thank you so very much, Excellency Ambassador Christian, Excellency Madam the Minister, Special Representative. It's a great pleasure for me to share with you some of the very voices from South Sudan. As witness staff, I had a chance to travel to South Sudan last year, and then I met with over 18 women's rights activists from South Sudan. As part of our mandate to train activists to use video and online technologies to expose rights violations across the world. In South Sudan, I had so many stories, including of those women who are identified as activists and who want to also have some skills in how they can use video to make sure that the voices of those women who are facing violence every day can be heard by audiences that have power to change the policies, to respond and address some of these the very basic needs of all of the women of South Sudan. The video I'm going to share with you today is a short video, 5-minute piece, and it highlights some of the very voices of those women who live under, in hunger. They are displaced as they have to flee almost every night and take care of the family. Some of them, their husbands were killed, and they live in struggle almost every day. So today, this is one of the videos that they have made through a Nuba report, which is a coalition of these activists. As they produce video almost every month, you have videos from South Sudan highlighting the very issues of the women, of the children, and the situation in general. So with that, I will show that video, which is a short video of 5 minutes, as I said.
Images. Hilde, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies, and a few gentlemen. Thank you for coming. I wanted to just, at the very outset, say it's a powerful film. It's important, though, to underline that this is Nuba Mountains, which is in South Kordofan and not in South Sudan, where I'm in charge of the peacekeeping mission. However, Yida, which they were referring to, is in South Sudan and is where many of the refugees are coming over the border. But it is still very relevant as a backdrop to what I'm saying, because this was the situation in many parts of South Sudan prior to the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. And so it's still very relevant. This is what women in South Sudan have been going through for many, many years, in fact, several decades. So for that reason also, it's highly relevant to what I'm going to say. So why is the Women, Peace and Security agenda important? Why is the gender perspective in peacekeeping critical? Many of you know this, but I thought it's important to remind all of us again. Women and children are the ones suffering the most from conflict and war. 70% usually are really the affected. Women and girls are also the ones suffering the most in the aftermath of conflict, because very many of them are in a situation where the post-conflict environment hasn't been conducive to their rights and to their needs. Yet we know that women and girls constitute 50% of the population in South Sudan as elsewhere. And the question, of course, is how can they be ignored in a very important period in rebuilding and reconstructing a country after war. As in other countries, but very much so in South Sudan, women have been the backbone of society during the conflict. The men were fighting, going back and forth. The women were actually the ones holding society together, holding the communities together, and where the real power hold in the local context. Very often what happens then comes peace, and then suddenly the men return and they take over office and take the powerful positions, and women are then expected to go back to normal, so to speak, which in South Sudan has been virtually never. But then again, we see a situation where, having been the power hold, they are put in a situation where they're in many ways put on the sidelines. And the very pertinent question I'm asking as SRSG of the leaders that I deal with is, how can you exclude and not take into account 50% of your own citizenship when you are going to reconstruct your own country and build your new nation? Not only is it a waste of resources, but it's also an underutilization of capacity to have them take their rightful place in rebuilding, in building South Sudan, because it was actually never constructed or built. The question then is, how can we do that? And the question you've asked me is peacekeeping, gender-responsive peacekeeping in practice. I'll revert to that in a minute, but to be able to answer that question, you also need a little bit more context. So I'll say a little bit more about South Sudan as such, how it influences the situation of women and girls. South Sudan is predominantly a pastoralist society. This is a nomadic society, which is very important to understand the rights of women and girls. Traditionally, these are very conservative societies, and very often women and girls have less influence than in other traditional societies. Customary traditions are very often strong and are held very high among pastoralist communities. And this means customary law, and it means the non-existence very often of education institutions of justice. It's very difficult when you have pastoralist societies with people on the move, how to retain institutional capacity in critical areas. This has an influence on the situation of women and girls. And some traditions are really strong, such as bride price, early forced marriages, preference of boys to girls with regard to education, and often also violence against women and girls. It's also important to know that from a perspective of services, the most dangerous place in the world to give birth now is South Sudan. Maternal mortality rates are extremely high. The last numbers I saw were actually worse than Afghanistan, but I'm also running them again with UNFPA here. But it's really 1 in 7 end in maternal death. So it's a very high number. At least 4 out of 10 women have experienced one or more forms of violence. So with regard to health, and the situation of women and girls, it's really tough. Paradoxically, and it speaks to the point I made on post-conflict situations, we have figures that say that violence against women increased by more than 40% after the CPA was signed. So actually there was an increase after the peace agreement. I assume because men returned home. And then of course the situation at home also can become more difficult. Also, if you look at another critical service like education, South Sudan is ranked as among the worst in the world with regard to gender disparity in school attendance. Primary school enrollment means that implies that 7 girls is getting education for every 10 boys, and secondary 5 girls for every 10. But their mothers are worse off. I don't know whether you know the illiteracy rates in South Sudan, but they are incredibly high. 84% of all women cannot read or write. 84. For men, the number is 60. So it's very high for the country in general. People were not educated during the Civil War, basically. And it's also related to the pastoralist communities. So then, if we look at women's political participation, that of course is impacted by illiteracy and cultural norms, obviously. There are commitments by the SPLM and by the transitional constitution to make sure that women are represented in the political office. They have a quotation rule of 25% minimum to, especially for parliament and government. However, if you look at the Council of Ministers, the cabinet, you need to include the deputy ministers before you reach 25%, because many more men are in the ministerial positions and many more women are in the deputy ministers' positions. For the National Legislative Assembly, it's not bad, 29%, so it's not as bad. But if you look at the districts, the states, only 1 out of 10 governors are women, and only 1 out of 76 county commissioners are women. So a long ways to go on political empowerment. I wanted to kind of give you this background drop of the situation in South Sudan so you have a little bit more of the context we are working in. So what are we doing to change this? How can we move from rhetoric to reality and make a difference in women's and girls' lives? We have in the UN a whole host of commitments internationally, a series of resolutions. 1325, that we all know, but also followed by 4 subsequent resolutions that in different ways have enforced stronger commitments to protect women, including from sexual violence in conflict and others. So we have had since then 1820, 1888, 1889, 1960. As then Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, I was active in working on many of this. I was leading up the UN Women, so the UN, help me now, against sex, UN Action. Thank you, I know. So we worked very hard to get these resolutions through. Now I'm in the field, and of course the question we always ask ourselves is, how can we make these resolutions, how can we make them make a difference in women's lives? We have also policy directives for gender mainstreaming in peacekeeping. Of course, we are following that. And we have a host of development commitments related to women's empowerment from a number of international conferences from Beijing onwards. I'm sure all of you almost know them by heart. So the question is, how can we get from resolutions to reforms and from resolutions to results? I think that's where we all struggle and we all want to see a difference being made. So let me just say a little bit about what we're doing in the mission and in the UN family in South Sudan. And I deliberately talk about the UN family because we are here together and we are supposed to make a difference together. And in many cases, we actually have partly overlapping mandates. So it's important that we, out of that, work jointly, but also ensures that we work with synergies and complementarity so that we can maximize the use of resources in the whole of the UN. And we are doing this through much more joint approaches. I think this is the first mission that is now working towards joint work plans between mission components and UN agencies. We have that in the rule of law area between UNDP and our rule of law. We are working towards the same with women, gender, as well as with HIV and as well as with children. So hopefully, if I come at any point in time later, I'll be able to share with you what that work plan looks like and how we're dividing the work between us. The reason why I'm saying this is that resources are scarce and we need to use them effectively to make a difference. And then we need to do it together. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense. So on the 1325, one of the most important things we've done is to create awareness and knowledge among South Sudanese women and government institutions about the resolution, its commitments, and the importance of its implementation. So there's been open peace forums that have been taking place in all 10 states that we have organized on 1325. A national conference was held with 4 priority areas being highlighted by South Sudanese women and participants: access to justice, secondly, participation in peace and security processes, they always feel excluded, thirdly, involvement in decision making, and fourthly, participation in national reconciliation processes. And these recommendations ended up in strong commitments on training police on SGBV. This we are doing in the mission quite actively with our on-call components, strengthening women community peace dialogue forums and supporting their empowerment, and capacity building, which is one of the critical issues that they are missing to be able to effectively participate in all these forums. And so, as an outcome of this, the Ministry of Gender has developed a national action plan for the implementation of 1325. This is now underway and is set to be implemented. We have also seen that the ministry is working on a national action plan for gender nationally generally, and they are taking these issues forward. But we know that we can only we can only succeed when gender stops being a gender issue and becomes an issue for everybody. Meaning it stops being a women's issue and it becomes an issue for everyone. And that's what I'm trying to do in the mission, and that's what we're trying to do with the government. And it's strange that we use the whole of government approach to other issues, but not to the softer ones, such as gender. And that's what we need to do. We need to try to have male colleagues own the agenda as much as female, and it's a long ways to go. So how are we doing this? So firstly, I want to focus on some empowerment actions that we're taking, and then some monitoring and reporting actions, and then I'll end up and invite everybody to participate in the discussion. So to change the reality of women's lives in South Sudan, we have empowerment strategies. And firstly, I mentioned the National Gender Policy and Strategic Plan for its implementation. This can only be done because also we are now in a situation where the government doesn't have any money. It's an austerity situation. So international partners are critical. UNICEF and UN Women are providing technical and financial support both to the ministry itself, but also to concrete actions in following up the commitments. We are working on increased representation of women. This follows the transitional constitution, and linked to that, we are helping to build the capacity of women parliamentarians, both at the state level as well as at the national level. And we are working very actively to build their capacity. So that's on the policy side. There's a very important process that started on constitutional review that has now been extended. I'm very happy about that, until December 2014, so there is time. It was initially quite a short timeline. Now there is time, the Parliament has decided, and hence we can, to a much larger extent, work on building the capacity of women-led organizations to engage in the constitutional review process. Many are already preparing for this quite actively. There's women representatives on the Constitutional Review Commission, and they're also looking at critical issues such as land, ownership, key issues for women in all countries, and in particular African countries. And we hope that through that process, more headway can be made for the gender and women's agenda in South Sudan. We are working with our gender unit, but also with colleagues in the UN country team to make that happen. Another important area is, of course, peace processes. There is both the North-South, South Sudan process, which is critical, and most recently there was active discussions between women's organizations of South Sudan and the AUHIP, the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel, to look at how they can participate more actively in the negotiations. So far there hasn't been any participation, and they were expressing their dissatisfaction. My understanding is that they were well received by Thabo Mbeki, and that they will now try to include their participation further. The problem, of course, is that it's very late in the process, very late in the day, but maybe better late than never. And so we'll see how that goes. We are on our side, because we're not involved in the North-South equation, supporting a number of peace processes locally in South Sudan to resolve intercommunal conflict, etc. And we are trying in that context to make sure that there's women's participation in these processes, and that they have a seat at the table in dialogue forums together with civil society. Particularly, we have advocated strongly and had strong support from the church for women's participation in the Jonglei peace process, where they were actively present in all meetings, and where the church has really empowered them to participate in all aspects of that peace process, grassroots as well as at the overall conference as such. That has worked well, and that's a model that we can use also in other peace processes. And we are systematically trying to encourage women to be included. Let me also provide one example. Whenever I am visiting the counties, local communities, when there has been conflicts or problems or tensions, we often meet under a tree with the community leaders, and I always ask the women to sit in the front row together with the paramount chiefs and the youth representatives. And every time I ask the women to have a spokesperson and the youth, and every time they speak. And this is a deliberate way for me as an SRSG to show that everyone has a voice, and everyone should have a voice. And actually, the most interesting thing last time was that a woman trumped the queue, and she went ahead of the paramount chiefs and spoke first. A really old lady in connection with a terrible attack. They lost around 100 people. and she was very angry and had the need to really vent her frustration, but also tell us what she thought was needed of support and protection. So women in South Sudan, despite all the statistics, can also be very, very powerful voices, and I'm sure many of you have met many of them. So they need a seat at the table, and to be able to do that and be effective capacity building, which is the last point on empowerment, is critical. We are working in several areas together with UN Women to build the capacity. I mentioned the parliamentary political work, but also in law it's important. Supporting customary law courts at the community level to build capacity for them to increase access of women and girls to justice, but in a way that is accommodating equal rights is critical. Also, UN Women has developed a community-based model of integrating peace building and economic empowerment with focus on rural women, where capacity building is part of the whole program. We in UNMISS are supporting training of SPLA military leadership on gender mainstreaming so that their capacity to understand the gender agenda is grasped. So these are among the activities and the actions we're taking to try to make a difference. Let me then finally go to the protection, monitoring and reporting side, which of course is critical, not least for the mission and for our work. We are, through the protection work we are undertaking, we are, as you know, one of the pilot countries for 1960 for the monitoring and reporting framework under the Security Council Resolution 1960. And we have now soon fully deployed around 10 women protection advisors. We're the first peacekeeping mission to do that in implementing the resolution. We are establishing the MARA, and while not a DRC situation where sexual violence is used as a weapon of war, South Sudan still has a number of violations in connection with different types of violence happening in communities. And I want to highlight one particular South Sudanese specific problem, which is abduction of women, which of course in the end leads to sexual violence against women, because if you're abducted, you end up becoming another man's wife, and we know what happens then. We are working to collect as much information as we can through our monitoring and reporting mechanisms, and we're just information in terms of how we will implement that protection and monitoring and reporting obligation. Apart from that, through protection work from our police, I want to highlight that because they are both having their own gender focal points in UNPOL, but they're also building gender desks in the South Sudanese National Police Service. This is very important because a lot of violations are happening and the police are not taking them seriously. And for women to have a place to go when things happen to them is fundamental. We're also supporting through both UNMISS and other partners the establishment of a special protection unit in police stations in Juba, where a lot of things are happening. And this is also increasing the number of SGBV cases that are being reported to the police and are referred to the court. So it's already working and is actually moving in the right direction. All of this will also be part of our report in this context. So the protection, monitoring and reporting work is critical for the mission and for our partners. So I've mentioned some of the things we're trying to do in practice, but would it be enough to change things around in South Sudan? Would it be enough to make the shift from rhetoric to reality, from resolutions to results? I don't think it's enough. This is just very limited compared to this huge, incredible challenge that we're faced with to really make a change that is felt by each and every woman and each and every girl in this country. There's so long ways to go. But I wanted us to also not only look at the cup as half full, half empty, but half full. We have seen how Rwanda, through at least the political empowerment process, can make a very swift change from marginalization to actually very solid representation, despite a number of challenges. And we've seen how it's possible for some to really make headway quickly. So let's hope that through a much stronger support from external actors, I have to say some of these areas are the most underfunded areas, both in the mission as well as in the UN country team, and the least capacity compared to other important areas. I'm not saying that we should cut elsewhere, I'm saying we should do more. And so we also need to see this area be prioritized from development partners as well as from our colleagues in the UN system so that we really can make headway. More should and could be done. So what I'm saying to the women that I see in South Sudan, you are the backbone of the struggle. You are to be the backbone of the future of South Sudan. Without you, South Sudan can never succeed. And so that's my last sentence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hilde, for your inspiring and thought-provoking comments. I'm sure a lot of people in the room have questions to ask you or simply comments to offer. And I want to turn it over immediately to the room. Please make use of this opportunity to engage with Hilde Johnson. The floor is open. Yes, please. Can you please identify yourself?
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Mavic Cabrera Baleza. I'm the International Coordinator of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. We're a membership organization of women's organizations and civil society from over 30 countries, mostly conflict affected, that work for the full and effective implementation of the Women, Peace and Security resolutions. And we have several members in South Sudan, Eve Foundation, CEPO, Voice for Change, and we're also working with the South Sudanese Civil Society Working Group on 1325. And some of the work that we do in South Sudan has been on the civil society monitoring of 1325, and we're happy to announce that in the 12th anniversary, for the first time, South Sudanese organizations came up with their own assessment of 1325 implementation in their country. And I'm also thankful, and I would like to publicly thank the Liechtenstein Principality for supporting our work in South Sudan, and mainly to translate the civil society report into Arabic to make it accessible to grassroots organizations in South Sudan. We were in Juba in in January to participate in and co-facilitate the National Action Plan 1325 conference with a joint donor team with UN Women and with Eve Foundation. And our main contribution was to enhance the capacity of civil society so that they could meaningfully and effectively engage in the National Action Planning process. And we also conducted a discussion on the cooperation agreement between the Sudan and South Sudan, as well as some discussions on CEDAW. And I would like to share a few observations and concerns that I'm hoping the SRSG that we would be able to take them up further with the SRSG to perhaps come up with practical solutions that we can, civil society broadly and her office could work on. Currently, the National Steering Committee on South Sudan's National Action Plan has 24 members and only one civil society representative. From our strategy session, the South Sudanese organization actually sent an official letter to the Ministry of Gender, which is coordinating the National Steering Committee, to increase the representation of civil society. Another concern is the capacity of the Ministry of Gender to lead the development and, more importantly, the implementation of the National Action Plan when officially adopted. The Ministry of Gender reported to us, to the whole steering committee, that at the moment they have zero budget for the National Action Plan. But quite apart from financial resources, we also think the Ministry of Gender needs a lot of support in terms of, their capacity to implement and also to strengthen their political influence within the South Sudanese government architecture. A third concern is the need to link the National Action Plan with the cooperation agreement between the Sudan and South Sudan. Right now, very, very few know about the cooperation agreement, let alone understand fully what it contains. And if the pillar of 1325, one of the main pillars is women's participation in decision making on all aspects of peace and security at all levels, then we're missing the point. If women do not, or majority of South Sudanese do not understand the cooperation agreement and would not be able to participate in honoring the peace agreement. So these are just some of the gaps that we've been discussing with our civil society partners, and we're really hoping that we could work with the Office of the SRSG to come up with practical solutions to address these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. Daniel.
My name is Frederick Arthur. I'm presently the Norwegian Ambassador for Women's Rights and Gender Equality. In one of my previous incarnations, I used to be the loyal Sherpa of Hilde. Then it was inspiring, and it was just as inspiring to listen to your introduction about South Sudan now, Hilde, so thank you very much. My question, I have just a small comment and then a question. My comment is in the parentheses related to what you said about bringing women to the table in peace and negotiation context. And I think that's extremely important. My experience comes from Guatemala, where I witnessed the final phases of the peace and negotiation processes, where the women were actually not at the table, but they were in an adjacent room. But only the fact that they participated in some way or the other as legitimate parties to the negotiation process, that itself created space for political activities, and it gave the women a large amount of legitimacy for further political participation. And during the general elections after the final peace accord was signed, there were more women in the National Assembly than there had been for decades before. This process has unfortunately been a little bit reversed, but that's a different story. But my question to you is, how do you engage with and cooperate with the civil society organizations? I ask you this because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we try to maintain good contact with Norwegian NGOs that are in the countries, also with the networks that these Norwegian NGOs do have in the countries. And we do this simply because when we are faced with challenges related to religion, to tradition, to history, we simply don't know how to address it. And our experience is that when we cooperate very closely with these partners on the ground, we get a lot of information, we get a lot of innovative and creative ideas, and I think that would be the case for the UN as well, if and when, and I guess you have, a very close cooperation exactly with these NGOs. So again, my question would be if you could elaborate a little bit on your cooperation with the NGO community, INGOs as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilde, you want to take maybe these two together, or should we take one more? Okay, Yael.
Hi, I'm Dr. Yael Danieli. I represent the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. And I have, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned Rwanda. I have done quite a bit of work in post-genocide, post-conflict countries. Part of the reason to the rise of women in Rwanda and the empowerment was that there was also awareness, never sufficient, of their need to heal, particularly issues related to rape, which I believe is major in South Sudan as well. How is that attended to? You spoke about reporting, but not about, so that after you report, what then? What is available or should be? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Firstly, on the points made by women peace builders, I'm happy to discuss this more in detail and see what can be done. I think the problem we're faced with with the Ministry of Gender and Child Welfare, as children and social welfare, is that actually the country itself is lacking resources across the board because they shut down their role on the 20th of January 2012, and that they're still surviving is a miracle, I think. But they're really hitting, if not rock bottom, it's getting very scarce. So the possibility of the government to allocate more resources is close to zero. And that's why I was also making the point that I think we need to have more support from the international community if these things are going to move forward. And UN Women is not well financed in South Sudan, nor is UNFPA or other of the UNICEF, to some extent, but some of these programs are really underfunded. And that means that also for capacity development you need resources, because you need people that can help build the capacity. On your points on the National Committee, I'm taking them forward. I can talk to them about that. When it comes to the National Action Plan and the cooperation agreement between Sudan and South Sudan, again, this has been put on hold totally because Sudan has decided to link all the implementation of the cooperation agreements to the security issue, to Nuba Mountains and South Kordofan and SPLM North, ref the video we saw a little earlier today, and this afternoon. So this has not moved forward in any way. Now, of course, that means there is time to also make sure that women's civil society organizations and women's organizations are abreast of what the agreements contain and how they can be implemented in a way that takes care of their concerns. And again, this is AUHIP, it's the African Union that negotiated this and not the UN. So this is also something that the African Union could do in following up on their now new commitment to try to include women more in the process. To Fredrik Arthur from Norway, just to say on the question of how I'm working with civil society, we have established for the mission and for me directly a consultative forum that consists of 30 prominent South Sudanese stakeholders from different walks of life. This includes everything from really senior old freedom fighters with high credibility in South Sudan to women's and youth organizations, media, and the faith-based communities, Islam and Christian and bishops, etc. It's an extremely useful forum. We take up every second month we meet and we take up a topic every time that is of significant concern to them, and they advise the mission on how they think we should implement our mandate and in which way we take this issue forward. One of the things we did, for example, was police reform, where the gender issues came up very strongly from several of the participants, and which we then have raised those issues even further with the Minister of Interior and the IGP and his colleagues. So we are using this very effectively as a tool to advise me and us, but also to reinforce messaging from the mission to the government, and also adapt our programs. I have quite active cooperation with the women's organizations and civil society. We do have regular meetings beyond that. We also have regular meetings with the umbrella organization of civil society, INGOs, the international ones. But the more direct engagement, of course, with the INGOs rests with the DSRHG, RCHC, to just use the alphabet soup of the UN, the triple hat. Toby Lancer, who is directly involved and engaged with all the INGOs, and particularly those in the humanitarian area. I'm sure we could do even more on this front. There's a very, very large number in South Sudan. But at least on the national side, I feel that we are catering quite well for getting the necessary input that we need. On the issues of rape and of traumatic stress, there is a proposed process now for a journey of reconciliation and healing in South Sudan, which is now being consulted with a number of stakeholders. A very important process, and it has to be designed in the right way. So far, the Vice President has engaged very actively, but we need to see a broad-based ownership going forward. In the context of that, and in the discussions that we've had with many stakeholders on this process, actually a point many are making is that we're all traumatized. Everyone in South Sudan is traumatized. There's a very high level of aggression, of violence, and people have virtually no other tools to handle their stress and their trauma than to use violence if things get out of control. It really is disturbing. Now, one of the things that women are experiencing, of course, in this context is rape. A very significant taboo topic still. very difficult to have this discussed in public forums. I do it from time to time, sexual violence and rape, when we talk about it, but it's also only with women, only for us. It's very difficult to have an open discussion. Lots of shame issues related to this. And so this has not been subject to the same kind of focus as it has been in DRC, where it, of course, has been large scale. I don't think we're looking at that type of situation in South Sudan. It's very different, also very different from Rwanda, but it's still a problem, and I'm sure a big problem, not least domestic violence linked to rape. So I think we are still a long ways to go in managing that. And I think what we're seeing now is more of these cases coming forward to these gender desks and the police stations that now have capacity in this area. Several of the international police have been deployed to some of them to help train and mentor and advise local police in how they manage these gender desks, and they are coming forward, as I said, with an increased number of SGBV cases. So this is going to be, I think, unraveled as we see go forward. The more presence and availability there is for this type of assistance, I think the more women, I think, will come forward as well. As regards treatment, it's virtually non-existent. There isn't one psychologist in South Sudan, not one South Sudanese psychologist, non-existent, let alone a psychiatrist. Doesn't exist. There's virtually no mental health capacity at all. There's no mental health clinic. All mental health patients are in prison or out in the communities. There is no options for them. So it's a devastating situation. There's absolutely no capacity to deal with the psychological impact of rape. To my knowledge, the only ones that are in existence in South Sudan are the staff counselors of the UN mission. Therefore, and 2 of them have capacity in this area. It's kind of a big paradox that it's for our UN staff and not for them. So these are among the things we need to discuss: is should we make those resources available to a larger extent to the population? This I don't know. It's probably UN rules against that too, but I'll have to look at it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hilde. Paul, please.
My friend Christian, I'm Paul Seger, permanent representative of Switzerland to the United Nations, and also thank you for this very fascinating introduction presentation made to us. You mentioned yourself the sentence from resolution to results, which I find really hits the point, hits the nail on the head. We have, as you said quite rightly yourself, several resolutions, 1325, and all the follow-ups resolutions, but still, from your account, as an SRSG down there, you can do just so much together with your colleagues. So my question is then, one of the main problems which is intriguing to us here in New York is how to get from the thematic to the concrete, to the geographical. What can we do here in New York within the council? Well, we're not members of the council, but we know that we are strongly looking into working members of the council. But what can we do here in New York to support your work down there? Because from my experience as chair in another configuration of Burundian peacebuilding, I think that this interaction between political pressure exercised here in New York by the council or by the UN system as a whole, and that's what the SRSG is doing down there, is one of the key factors of success. So my question is, what can we do more to help you succeed down there?
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Melanie. I'm actually a graduate student at the University of Bridgeport studying global development and peace. Geographically, I'm concentrating on the Great Lakes region of Africa due to a 2007 summer that I spent actually in Nimule, South Sudan. And I'm currently writing a paper on the development of education system in South Sudan. And I was wondering what impact on women's empowerment you think the development of an education system, and specifically training women to be teachers as potential role models, could have on women's empowerment.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, please.
My name is Anna Tinelli. I am also a graduate student at the School for International Training Graduate Institute in Vermont. And my question relates to your comment about one of the bodies of the United Nations, UN Women, that are looking to integrate economic development with peace processes or efforts to build peace through economic development, and how they're engaging women in this process and sort of what some of those programs look like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you maybe also a question, Hilde? It's been one of our sort of mantras in our statements on women, peace and security, that we've tried to promote a stronger presence of women in positions such as yours. What, from your perspective, is the difference you're making by being a woman, not by being an expert? I hope you're going to say the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good questions. What can you do more here in New York? I think only political pressure gets you so far, because there also needs to be a recipient at the other end that is willing to hear your message. And I'm not saying they're not, but there is a certain level of maturity that has to develop over time. So I think you have to have a combination of very many different tools to move this agenda forward. You need to put political pressure, but you also need to empower women through building their capacity. I think you need to help build the structures around them so that their organizations become more effective, more powerful, and maybe more listened to. And then I think you need to have development, investment, the question on education. There needs to be, I think, a very, very strong investment in education of girls in primary, but also bringing many to secondary and to university. Because if you don't have talent to really develop, you will not have many that can then become selected as strong ministers of finance and foreign affairs and so on. So it's a full package. Everything in a way needs to be done at the same time. If you only apply political pressure through, S3 reports and resolutions and blah blah, it goes only so far. And by the way, they don't always read it either. So it's this is the other factor in South Sudan. This is an oral culture. I'm an anthropologist, that's why I'm interested in this. The stories don't read that much. Okay, so for them, the oral communication is much more important. It's what you say more than what you write. And so that's very important for understanding the dynamics locally. So one of the most effective tools might actually be to have songs developed about the importance of empowering girls and women, because they use songs as a way of communicating a political message. It's very common among Nuers, Dinkas, Toposa, etc. So these are among the things that many traditional development actors don't think about. But we really need to look at creative ways of strengthening the message. And so what can you do to support me? Clearly, we have now some resources through the Women Protection Advisors, but my view is the gender unit is still quite weak. We have a situation where their counterparts are also undersourced, as I was saying. So I think UN Women's field presence is very limited at the moment. So other actors. So I think development funding going to those, so they can send some of their best talent to some of the most difficult countries is one way of supporting me, meaning supporting the women in South Sudan, because that's what matters actually. Education, I think I partly answered the question. It's absolutely fundamental, and I think seeing women as role models, training teachers, absolutely, and I think. One of the things that also we need to do is to work on bride price issues and bride marriages from a cultural perspective at the same time as you work on education, because even if it's available, the dropout rates for girls in South Sudan are incredibly high, and this is linked to forced marriages or young marriages. Which again leads to the high mortality rates among pregnant women. So, it's all linked. But I think, so investing in education must be done at the same time as one addresses some of the impediments against women and girls to get education. Now, the other one that I really would love to see is a massive literacy program for women in South Sudan. A massive literacy program, just adult literacy program that really is everywhere. They would love it. They really would love it. The mission has presence now in quite a number of counties. We will be present over the next 2 to 3 years in 35 counties in addition to the 10 state offices. This is a huge opportunity for us to have literacy classes. We build community centers together with funding from Norway and the Netherlands via UNDP. So the mission plus the staff of the UN agencies can together make use of those locations. And they have community centers linked to the counties. And so that can be used effectively for literacy classes for all the women in the village, you know. So these are things that can be done, but we need partners to do it, and we need resources to fund it. And so if that comes, then you can do teacher training and so on, but you can also have young girls that have done secondary school do literacy classes for the elder women in the village. You know, there are many ways of doing this. Economic empowerment, I know less about the details of UN Women's program, but I think it is linked to two things. It's peace building through economic empowerment more than peace processes. So, but my understanding is that it's going more in the direction of microcredit programs, that type of things that gives them some cash at hand so that they can do more in developing their own communities and their own fiscal situation, and in that way it's part of an overall peace building program. We have a peace building support plan that we have done together with South Sudan and the UN country team. It's the first of its sort in the Security Council, never done before, and we are still, despite austerity, moving forward in implementing parts of the peace building support plan, including some of the empowerment. Economic empowerment issues. Does it make a difference to be a female SRSG? Well, I guess the South Sudanese would be the best to answer that question, but I think two things maybe, then this is maybe an experience also from my former capacity as minister in Norway when I was that. Being a woman isn't always a disadvantage because you're not seen, I mean, you can be, in our case, when we come from a different country, this is very different from their own women, by the way. So when you come from a Western country, you're more an X than you are a woman. You see what my point? So you're not seen as them, you're seen as some X that can't be defined, literally. So, and the X role gives you a lot of opportunity to play political informal roles that I think many men are barred from doing, because a man that comes from another country is still a man, and you know, you have the testosterone thing. Whilst if you are an ex, you can use that opportunity to have informal chats with the president and the vice president and ministers, and you can tell them pretty straight, you know, are you sure that's very wise? And if you do that, you know, as a man, I'm not sure it will go down that well. So I think it's an advantage in those settings, and that was my experience certainly when I worked on the peace process for Sudan. But secondly, I think it matters for the issues we have talked about. If you are a woman that is focused on gender issues as well as the other parts of your mandate, but that you have that focus, I'm seeing from many South Sudanese women that when I turn up at their events and so on, they're saying that I'm there gives them hope, both for their issues, but also that women can take those positions. So it's kind of for them empowering. But I also think that I'm not sure any SRSG would insist on giving the floor to a woman every time you're sitting with a community and making sure that they have a seat at the front and have a role to play. I think that goes, some men would do it, but not all men. Maybe some women won't do it, I don't know. So it depends also on your personal commitment. But I think we would have a tendency to want to see them have that role, maybe more than our male colleagues. But I haven't seen them in action, so it might be still overstating the importance of gender. So those are my few thoughts on that.
Thank you very much for that.
Kenny?
Yeah, I just wanted to add two few things. One is on the question of what can be done from New York to South Sudan. I think it's also very important to note that when the SRG said, and one of the members here in this audience said, that the Ministry of Gender lacks resources. So which means the provision of resources to build some of the programs that are being developed by the Ministry of Gender can really help address the situation. But the problem though is the corruption in South Sudan, because when I traveled there, I heard so many, activists saying, of course, they are happy to have a new government, new state, everything is wonderful, but they are also, meeting challenges around corruption within some of the overall officials. So this in itself can be a challenge when a nation, when some programs need to be implemented. That's one. Second, on education, I think it is very important also to stress out the need for, to kind of strengthen the education through informal education. Usually when we talk about education, we all think that, okay, women or girls need to go to a classroom and sit down and listen to a teacher, which is very good. But also we have to learn, what kind of a creative method that can help, address the situation of the education in a country like Sudan, South Sudan, that was affected by years of conflict, lack of infrastructure, and everyone needs to get something in order to move forward. So these were the two small points I wanted to raise.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Otherwise, yes.
I'll try to speak loud. I'm Suzanne Hanchett. I'm with the International Women's Anthropology Conference. And I'm curious to know if there are any indigenous nation-building institutions where you might have an opportunity to make some space for women through negotiation or something, or are there any that include women? That was the question.
Thank you. A final question? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Sandra Zadi, and I represent the Fountain of Miracles. It's an organization whose focus is on children in orphanages. So my question to you is, do you or anyone here know of any reputable orphanages that our organization can work with? Because the problem is, my husband, who is in business in New York, we've gone to orphanages before, done great works with them, and what happens is a lot of times the persons who are helping at the orphanage, they themselves are in need of food and that sort of thing. So the provisions for the children are never really used by them. It's taken by the facilitators to their families. So I'm just interested, and I'm saying it out loud. I never usually do this, but I said from now on when I come to these meetings, I'm just going to say it out loud, that this is a need that I do have. We are having the resources to do it, but we do not want to work with anyone who is not going to take care of the children's needs. So if anyone had that information, I'd be glad.
Thank you very much. First, on your points, I agree with you on education, by the way. We need to find creative ways of doing that. On corruption, I just wanted to make one point. You're very right. And one of the points I've made to the President in private is, why don't you in your next reshuffle appoint many, many more women ministers, because you will be less corrupt. And it's true, by the way. I happen to know them, both the candidates and those that are in government at the moment. So the best qualified women we can trust totally with money. So we'll see what happens. The reshuffle is around the corner, I've been told. Anyway, on the nation-building institutions, I think there is less. Basically, South Sudan has very weak institutions, almost no institutions. So it's more about the processes that exist that we help, bring women to the table and help build their capacity. So more than a proliferation of different institutions, it's better to bring in qualified women, and we know who they are, and try to help build their strengthen their ability to be included in all these different processes. But there's some very interesting, from an anthropological point of view, nation building work taking place in the Ministry of Culture. So if there is anybody on your site that are interested, there's very, very interesting work going on what it means to build a nation, cultural heritage, diversity. How can we, through diversity, unify, rather than diversity becoming something that actually tears us apart as a nation. So there's lots of interesting work going on. Jock Madhu-Jock is the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Culture. He's working on a lot of this. He's an anthropologist. Just like, you know. I loved your intervention, and I have, if you can give me your card, I have 2 or 3 very good contacts. Again, you can just imagine a country that comes out of war, how many children that have been separated from their parents, how many that are street children and orphans, a big number. And so I know of 2 institutions that you can trust 160%. One actually is run by a nun. She doesn't even have proper shelter, and she's doing it at her own cost in West Equatoria, and she has HIV infected children. They don't have anything. And you know, she does everything herself. So those are the types of institutions you can really help and support and trust. And they need to build a shelter. They need everything. And there's also other institutions run by NGOs that are running very, very short of funds at the moment and are very solidly driven, very, very able people. So I'm happy to give you contacts. I have at least several that you can support. So I hope other people also can join hands and maybe be part of an effort to help people. There's so many people suffering in South Sudan, and they need every support they can get. So thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you. And before closing, I'd like to give the floor quickly back to my minister.
First of all, I would like to thank everybody for the comments. Hilde, I am fascinated about your life and your work and what you told us today. I think it's important to have the insight. But for me as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's important to have role models. It's important to have people who raise their voice and that stand up for other women. And I think that's what we should be here for. We should stand up and we should give the floor and the voice to the women in Sudan and other women that need the support from politics, but from NGOs and from everybody, from us. I think the dialogue is very important. I learned a lot, to be very honest, and you can count on the continued support from me. So thank you to everybody.